Hi, this is Mark White with the American Refugee Committee. It's December 15th, 2010. I'd like to take a second to introduce you to a new grant policy that we are about to roll out. We would like to launch it on the 1st of January 2011. Right now we're in the initial draft phase with the policy. What that means is we're sending it out to the countries for the finance controllers and the country directors to read it and send it back to us with comments. Being that it is in the draft form, we will go ahead and launch it live on January 1st. However, we also want you to know that it's going to be a living document that may take a few revisions before we get it exactly the way we want it to continue on. So during that period of time from now, and it may be 3 or 4 months, we'll be going back and forth and updating it with small modifications. Now, for the most part, I think the policy is in pretty good shape, and it'll serve as a good guideline as we start the new fiscal year and for the way that we want to record the grants, the revenues, the receivables, and the cash that we receive and move around the organization. That's what this policy is all about, and I wanted to take a few minutes just to go ahead and give you a quick overview and give you some of the thoughts we had behind the policy that we're sending out and some of the elements to it. So the policy breaks down into 3 core statements or policy statements. Those policy statements relate to the, give me 1 second, I should have had this set up. Here we go. It relates to the indirect cost recovery revenue. That's one element of the policy. The other one is the grant revenue entity, so which entity records the grant revenue and the receivable. The third element of the policy is the indirect cost recovery, or the ICR cash, that's received by a country office when the actual expenses are incurring at headquarters, and how do we deal with the cash that's received in the country office to cover indirect cost expenses that are incurred at headquarters. So those are the 3 elements. Let me go through them very quickly and then get on to the 10 procedural portions, which we're not going to go through one by one, thankfully for you, but I did want to give you a quick overview of what we're trying to do with the procedures. So back to the 3 policies. Number 1, indirect cost recovery revenue policy. That one reads that the indirect cost recovery revenue will be reserved to fund the administrative support costs of the American Refugee Committee. So what that boils down to is the portion of the grant that relates to covering the indirect costs is going to be reserved to cover those costs. It's not to be used to fund unfunded expenditures or overspends. So it's going to be reserved strictly for covering the indirect costs. So if there are uncovered costs associated with a grant, they're going to be covered by another source of funding, not through the ICR. Number 2, the grant revenue entity policy. This one relates to which company is going, or which entity is going to be recording the grant. So the grant revenue and the related grant receivable will be recorded by the American Refugee Committee entity receiving the grant funds directly from the donor, regardless of which ARC entity signed the agreement. So forget about who signed it. You're looking at who's going to receive the cash. That entity is the one that will be recording the receivable and the revenue at the time of obligation. Last one is the indirect cost, relates to the indirect cost recovery cash. We talked a little bit about it already. It states that the ICR revenue received from a donor by a country office will be transferred to headquarters and reserved to cover the indirect costs associated with supporting the project. Now, I recognize, and we all recognize, that not all the countries can legitimately and legally transfer cash to the United States, and in those cases we're going to come up with a virtual way for the cash to be transferred back to headquarters. That would be an offset for funds that headquarters owes to that country. So if the country receives the cash, the ICR portion of the cash from the transfer is going to be transferred on to headquarters. The rest of the covered direct costs will stay there at the field office. That's the nuts and bolts of those 3 policies, or 3 elements of this policy. the 10 procedures. I've talked about it a little bit and alluded to it already. The procedures is that we're going to go step by step all the way through from cradle to grave, each type of transaction and how you would record those transactions into Serenic. So we've identified 10 specific events, and we've got examples to go through and show you how those are actually entered. So it's more of procedure. It's not the policy, it's the procedure of how you and what account codes do you record a transaction to. So we've got starting with the assignment of the fund codes, how we use the fund codes, recording the award obligation, requesting funding from the donor. I'm just reading right off the headers here. The general recording of the receipt of cash from a transfer from a donor. Let's see here, let's slide down a little bit further. We also have the intercompany transfer of direct grant revenue from headquarters to a country office and how that happens. So you can see it's going to go in quite a bit of detail, step by step, on how to account for a grant. So that's the high-level overview. So let me give you your assignment real quick. I want you to read the policy. I want you to, until we go final with this policy, which might be another 3 months or so, we're going to be having a dialogue back and forth and giving feedback and taking feedback back and forth and keep continually amending the document until we're final with it and we're happy with what we've got. So read it, provide your feedback. You can either do that by tracking the changes. It's a Word document, so turn the track changes function on, and then put in your comments, track the changes you want to make, send the document back to us, and we'll have a look at it. Or you can print it, write your comments right on the page, scan it, and send it to us. That works as well. Either way, you can even put your comments in an email. You be creative, but I want to hear what you have to say. So with that, have a read, send them back, send your comments back, and we'll send you out the next version and be ready to go live with this on January 1st. So with that, I want to wish everyone a happy holiday season, and I also want to wish everyone a prosperous 2011 for the American Refugee Committee. This is Mark White. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.